Hey, well, good morning, everybody. It's great to have so many of you with us today. Hope you enjoy the session. I'm going to just share my screen and we'll get started. Now, today's session is introducing the new pathway recognising products certified overseas. Today's session is actually exclusive for product suppliers, manufacturers, and merchants. And so we've tailored content we think that will be of particular interest to you. Now, we should all be aware of the government's goal to reduce the cost of construction. And at the heart of this legislation is increasing competition and reducing barriers. Government's got a particular focus on reducing the requirement and cost for local certification of quality building materials already certified overseas. So the objective of our session today is to provide an overview of how the approved product certified overseas pathway will work, what is behind the pathway to reassure you of the mechanics and process that MB are developing, and information on the next steps, in particular timing for what will be 3 phases of the rollout through 2025 and into 2026. My name is Matthew Duder. I'm General Manager of EBOS. EBOS spent the last 19 years working with product suppliers, main focus on formatting and presenting your technical documentation, and we also manage the BPIR ready software. I'm coordinating today's webinar, and I'm doing that with a team of MB Principal Advisors who I'll introduce shortly. We're also joined by Evan, Ellen, and Aradna from MB who will be assisting with your questions and comments. Now, in terms of timing, we have a concise 25-minute presentation, and we've allowed up to another 25 minutes for your questions. Now, as part of this, the session should be interactive. We appreciate your feedback, and we'll be running polls at the beginning and end of today's session. In fact, let's kick off with an intro poll. I'm just interested to understand your level of knowledge of this new pathway before today's session. So if you can please answer that over the next 30 seconds, that would be appreciated. Now, we also welcome your questions, so please use the Q&A function here on Zoom, and our team will look to address those either during the session online or as part of the Q&A session that will follow the presentation. Now, to kick things off, I'd like to welcome Amanda McCauley, Principal Advisor of System Performance and Implementation, to get us started. Amanda's based in Christchurch, and Amanda, a warm welcome.
Thanks, Matt, and kia ora koutou. So for those of you who may have kept up to date with announcements, you'll know that this pathway is one of 3 that have been introduced to provide New Zealanders with more choice of building products and healthier, safer and more durable buildings while balancing costs. Now, we have already completed webinars on the first 2 pathways, those being the building product specifications, which was published at the end of July, and the endorsed standards pathway. So those of you who want more general information on these, there is a recording from that webinar from June that's available on our website, which includes more high-level detail. We also have a bunch of resources and information about all 3 pathways on our website as well. So the focus of today's webinar will be around the recognition of building products certified overseas. We will provide some relevant detail specifically for you suppliers, manufacturers and merchants, highlighting some key areas where we're seeing some questions already coming in. So I'm going to provide a brief overview of this specific pathway to begin the session, and then my colleague Claire will follow with some more detail. So at a high level, this pathway will see MB evaluating building products or building methods certified under an overseas product certification scheme, and will issue a recognition notice. Now, these recognition notices will have the same status as a product certificate under the Building Act and must be accepted by building consent authorities if the product is being used within its intended use and with any limitations or conditions imposed by the recognition. Now, recognition notices will detail what New Zealand Building Code clauses the products have been assessed against and which ones are relevant, and if there are, as I said, any conditions or limitations that we need to impose to ensure those products are compliant and suitable for use in New Zealand. So in terms of where we are at the process, you can see we've had a really busy 2025 so far. So the legislation that enabled this pathway was introduced in April this year, and then it was closely followed by the commencement of the relevant regulations in August. So the building product certification regulations have now been updated, and these include the relevant criteria for decision making when we evaluate products for recognition. So on this timeline here, we've sort of broken the implementation down of this pathway into 3 phases. Now, phases 1 and 2 relate to watermark product certificates. Now, our Minister for Building and Construction selected Watermark as the first scheme that would have product certificates evaluated for recognition. And the reason for this is Watermark is referenced in New Zealand Building Code compliance documents for plumbing and drainage products. And many of these products and their materials are already widely accepted here in New Zealand, and many of them are tested against joint Australian and New Zealand standards. And what is a woohoo moment for us? Phase 1 has been completed, and we published 22 recognition notices in mid-September this year. Now, these recognition notices cover around 92,000 tapware and other plumbing products from the Watermark scheme. And these recognition notices and the relevant information can be found on our Building Performance website. So these recognition notices issued under phase 1 include Watermark product certificates that were, again, as I mentioned, certified against joint Australian New Zealand standards and the Australian standard for tapware, which is Australian standard 3718. It's important to note that not all products under this standard that have a Watermark certificate have been included in this first phase of recognitions. For example, any product certificates that expired before 2026 have not been included in this first round, just for ease, so we don't have to go back and redo a whole bunch of recognition notices. So right now, we're currently in the middle of evaluating product certificates for phase 2, and this will see the next lot of Watermark products moving on from tapware into some of the more complex products. And these include products that have been certified to Australian standards or Watermark technical specifications. And we're looking to publish those recognition notices once evaluation is complete around December this year. Now, phase 3 will be the starting point for other recognitions outside Watermark, so looking at other overseas product certification schemes and other building product typologies. Now, we are developing an application process for recognition of these other non-Watermark products. So when released we're hoping around mid-2026, product manufacturers, suppliers, and importers of all building products or methods with an overseas certification can apply directly to MB for recognition, but there'll be more on this later in the webinar. So I'll now pass on to my kaimahi, Claire Botha, Principal Advisor in Building System Delivery and Insurance, who will explain the process of how we issue a recognition notice in more detail.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you, Amanda. So I'm going to bring you through a little bit more of the mechanics of the recognition process and criteria. So as you may have heard in previous webinars, the process for recognising overseas products involves 2 key steps: assessment of the product certification scheme against the criteria set out in the regulations, and evaluation of the product certificate itself. Today, we want to take a closer look at the certification schemes. As we've noticed, there's still a little bit of confusion around what they are and kind of how they work. So what is a product certification scheme? A product certification scheme is a formal process that verifies whether a product consistently meets specific standards or regulatory requirements. It gives assurance to the regulators, industry professionals, and consumers that the product has been properly evaluated and is safe, reliable, and fit for purpose for use. You'll see in the key elements of a typical scheme that are on screen right now. So let's start with the accreditation body. This is usually a nominated organisation responsible for accrediting other organisations, and these are commonly referred to as conformity assessment bodies, or CABs for short. For simplicity, I'll just stick with CABs throughout. For this pathway, the accreditation body must belong to an internationally recognized organization, such as the International Accreditation Forum, and must accredit cabs to an appropriate standard. You can kind of think of this as a cascading set of assurance requirements designed to ensure that every party involved is doing what they've committed to doing. Next in the chain, down below certification scheme, are the cabs themselves. And these are independent third-party organizations that assess products. They evaluate the evidence provided to determine whether a product complies with the relevant standards for its intended use. It's important to note that cabs don't usually test the product directly. Instead, they evaluate those test results. Sometimes they may request additional testing during the evaluation process, and this might be carried out by another part of the same organization. We've found that this distinction is often really misunderstood, especially where organizations operate under a single brand but have sort of multiple functions. So for example, if you take Brands has both the testing arm and an appraisal and code mark service. So one of the key requirements of a certification scheme is that any conflicts of interest and impartiality are managed, so the evaluation remains independent. Certification schemes often work alongside the local legislation and standards like ISO 17065. And these ensure that cabs have robust policies and procedures and systems, and that these are properly implemented. Another important point is that certification isn't a one-off event. Certified products are monitored on an ongoing basis to ensure they continue to meet those requirements. And this might involve manufacturer audits or checks to confirm that installation methods and technical documentation are current and correct. Now, you might be wondering, if a building product is already certified by a trusted overseas third party, why does it need to be recertified or appraised locally? So this question really goes to the heart of the new legislation. The intent is that MB will be able to evaluate both the overseas certification scheme, which we don't currently do until this new legislation came into effect, and the product certificate itself, and then issue that recognition notice. So this notice confirms that the product's performance, as stated in the overseas certificate, meets the minimum requirements of the New Zealand Building Code. To begin with, we've focused with one particular scheme, as Amanda mentioned, the Australian Watermark Scheme, and this has allowed us to test the process and simplify implementation for the industry moving forward. In future, this approach will be expanded to cover all product categories. So how does this actually work in practice? Let's talk about the output of this process, and it's what we call a recognition notice. To issue a recognition notice, MB must complete a two-step process, as I mentioned before. Evaluate the product certification scheme to ensure that it meets criteria set out in those regulations, and evaluate the specific product certificate issued under that scheme. There are product certification schemes operating all around the world, and these schemes evaluate and certify products based on their own rules and standards. Once a product meets those requirements, a product certificate is issued by a CAB, that's a conformity assessment body, and then ongoing monitoring begins. When someone applies for a product evaluation through this new overseas building product certification pathway, MB needs to check several criteria. And that is that the scheme is accredited to appropriate standard by a recognized accreditation body. And does the scheme have robust processes in place? And importantly, do those processes cover how the scheme evaluates, certifies, monitors, and monitors products or methods? We also look at whether the scheme ensures its staff and certifiers act independently, professionally, and with integrity. These checks are essential to ensure that overseas certification scheme is trustworthy and the product certificate can be relied on to meet New Zealand's building code requirements. Once we're confident that the scheme meets the requirements of the criteria, the next step is to evaluate the product certificate itself. To do this, we look at whether the certificate is accessible, i.e. can it be readily accessed by the public, and that it contains enough technical information to enable us to provide a translation of the certified product's intended use. It's compliant with relevant New Zealand Building Code clauses, and any conditions and limitations that might be part of that recognition. We also check for any warnings or bans on that product and confirm that the certifier's accreditation hasn't been suspended or revoked. So most importantly, we need solid evidence that the product or method will comply with the New Zealand Building Code when its use is intended. Because this is often a really technical process, as you'll know, MB may engage technical experts to support robust and informed decision making. And those experts will be specific to those areas of expertise. If the certificate meets all the criteria set out in the regulations, we then begin the process of formally drafting the recognition notice. Now, it's important to understand that a recognition notice is a form of secondary legislation, just like an acceptable solution or verification method. That means when we include product certificate numbers or standards in the notice, it's considered incorporation by reference. As a result, we are required to carry out public consultation. So this gives the sector and wider public a chance to provide feedback on whether the information in the notice is suitable for recognition. We did this in early September for the products included in phase 1, and Amanda mentioned that in one of the previous slides. Once consultation closes and we've reviewed all of the submissions, MB will either finalise the notice as proposed, amend the notice to reflect the feedback, or in some cases decide not to proceed. If the decision is to proceed, the Minister for Building and Construction is required to table the notice in Parliament. Then once tabled, the notice is officially confirmed. MB will then publish the notice in the New Zealand Gazette and on the register, which will be available on the Building Performance website. So just like other forms of secondary legislation, recognition notices can be amended or revoked. For example, if the product certificate changes or becomes invalid. I'll now pass you back to Amanda.
Kia ora team, I'm back. Thanks, Claire. So as a recognition notice is a deemed to comply pathway, as I mentioned earlier, a building consent authority must accept a notice as evidence of compliance with the building code, provided the product has been specified in accordance with its intended use and any limitation or conditions stated in the recognition has been complied with. So in practice, recognition notices have the same weight as a New Zealand code mark certificate or a national multi-use approval, or more commonly known as multi-proof. So I'll use an example from one of our recently published phase 1 watermark recognition notices. So to use a recognition notice for a watermark product, you'll need to find the product certificate details. So for watermark, you'll find these on the Australian Building Code Board register or on one of the conformity assessment body registers to ensure the certificate is valid. You can see here on this slide that this product certificate, the cab here is SAA Global, and you'll be able to find these details on any watermark product certificate. So if you want to use a certificate as a deemed to comply pathway, you must then also ensure that the recognition notice for that product has the product certificate listed on it, including the appropriate version. And you can find all our published recognition notices on our Building Performance website, which, by the way, is www.building.govt.nz. So here's just a wee screenshot from our website. And we've got all our first 22 recognition notices there. And you can see just down there on the bottom, the first recognition notice is for showers from Watermark, and you can see where you can download the recognition notice for those products. Now on the screen at the moment, you can see an example of a Watermark recognition notice. Now it clearly states which building code clauses apply to that product, and these are the clauses that have been identified during the evaluation process. And the notice also outlines the scope and intended use of the product, as well as any relevant conditions and limitations. And you can see here down at the bottom, this recognition notice does have some additional conditions to ensure that the product is compliant with our building code and our environment in New Zealand. Now, this notice also states all the product certificates that this notice covers. So in the case of watermark certificates, the recognition also notes the standard to which the product certificate relates to, and this is a particular feature of the watermark scheme. Now, an easy way to find out if a watermark certificate is included on a notice is to check which standard it has been evaluated against and then find the recognition notice for that standard. And we formatted the publication of our recognition notices on our website so you can identify that standard really quickly. So you can find the product type, the standard to which it's been certified to, and then you can download the recognition notice that is attached to that. Now, if the certificate is not listed on the notice, or if that certificate has changed or expired, it is not able to be used as a deemed to comply pathway. So it's really important that you access the product certificate and also check the recognition notice and make sure that that product certificate is the one that's listed on that notice. So once you have a copy of the product certificate that you want to use and a copy of the recognition notice that it applies to, and you're confident that both are valid and they match, you'll need to provide these with a building consent application. So the BCA will do their due diligence and they'll check that the recognition notice is current and does include the noted certificate. They'll check that the certificate is also current, and they'll check that the product is being used in accordance with its intended use as specified on the recognition notice and within any relevant conditions or limitations. Now, if any of these fail in that check, then the watermark certificate cannot be used as a deemed to comply pathway, and the BCA will need to continue to assess the product following the usual reasonable grounds assessment. Now, I think, as we mentioned earlier, phase 3 will have a slightly modified process, but we'll outline this in a webinar in the new year. So, big question for everybody when we've been talking about these pathways is liability. So for overseas building product importers and suppliers, the liability settings aren't changing. They remain the same as they are now for any imported building product. So for example, Section 14G of the Building Act states that importers and suppliers must ensure that their product will comply with the relevant provisions of the New Zealand Building Code if that product is installed in accordance with the technical data, specifications, etc., that have been prescribed by the manufacturer. The Building Product Information Requirement Regulations, or BEPA, also still apply to any recognised overseas certified product. So this means product suppliers must comply with BEPA requirements, including completing self-declarations for their products if they want to import them into New Zealand. And of note, the Consumer Guarantees Act of 1993 also requires that building products are of acceptable quality, fit for purpose, match their description, and are supported by spare parts and repair facilities in New Zealand. And I'll pass back to Claire.
Thanks, Amanda. As mentioned in the earlier timeline, MB is currently in the process of recognising the remaining watermark certificates, and we aim to have this work completed before Christmas. Looking ahead, phase 3 will mark the beginning of recognising overseas certified products beyond watermark. So this can potentially include products like cladding, insulation, and windows. The details of the application process for phase 3 are still being developed, and I see there's a question in the Q&A about this. And we're taking on board lessons learned from our watermark recognition process to help shape a smoother experience for applicants and the industry. We'll be providing clear guidance well before applications open. And this will include what information MB needs to see in your application and how the assessment process will work. So if you're considering using a recognition notice as a compliance pathway, rest assured we'll give you plenty of notice to prepare your application, and you can expect to see further communication later this year and in the early new year. EBOS and MB have planned a number of sessions with industry to inform them of the changes and what it may mean for them. So these include a webinar for architects and designers on how to use recognised products on the 15th of October, a webinar focusing on watermark recognitions for plumbers and builders on the 16th of October, and a specialised training session for BCAs on the 22nd of October. I'll now pass back to Matt for question time. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks very much, Claire and Amanda. So in summary, this is a new pathway and it's live right now with a focus on tapware. This will expand to more complex watermarked products in December. And then in mid-2026, there should be an application process set up for all other building product categories. So for those of you who are considering this as a potential compliance pathway for either existing or new products that have overseas certification, it's the key criteria, in the new year, you'll get clear instructions on the details to not only apply, but also what will be required as part of the application, and some certainty around the timing of when that will begin. So with that in mind, I'll stop sharing my screen and we can get into a few questions. Have a look here. All right, Claire, I just wanted to go to you. I've got a question here. I'm currently considering watermark for a new product that will be launched in mid-2026. Should I be considering a recognition notice?
So if you're currently considering watermark or code mark, did you say code mark?
Code mark.
Yeah, for a new product launching in 2026, that's a really solid pathway. Code mark is currently widely regarded as the gold standard for product certification in New Zealand, and that's because it covers, it has a high level of assurance and it's backed by a robust framework, and it's specifically designed for New Zealand market and New Zealand code requirements, right? However, it is worth noting that recognition notice offer a different kind of pathway, and this can be a useful option if your product is already certified under a trusted overseas scheme, and you're looking to streamline your entry into New Zealand. It's worth noting that there are some limitations for recognition notices, so they are scheme specific, meaning that MB has to evaluate the scheme and then the product certificate itself. And also the scope of that recognition is fairly tightly defined in respect of the building code clauses that we can recognize, and that's because it's dependent on the product certificate, the evidence that's provided on the product certificate. So if your product is new to market and you're seeking broad acceptance and flexibility, code marks still might be the better fit, but the recognized notices are a good alternative pathway if you're looking to you already have your product certified overseas.
Claire, so that means there could be some recognition notices that don't reference all code requirements?
Yeah, that's right. The notice will specify the product's intended use and the relevant building code clauses or any conditions and limitations. But this is dependent on what evidence MB can evaluate and validate from the product certificate itself, and any potentially supporting information that the applicant provides to us around the translation of that certificate into the New Zealand building context.
Yep. So just to be clear, there could be a product that's imported that has not been certified to building code requirements here. Let's just say that that's seismic as one example. And so along with the recognition notice, there may well be a requirement for testing and local certification for that particular performance to support the compliance pathway.
Yeah, that's right. So when a building consent authority gets, or when you're specifying, somebody specifies the products, they'll need to note what code clauses are covered under the recognition notice. And then if it's used outside of that, if there's other code clauses that it needs to comply with, then you'll potentially need to provide additional evidence for those specific code clauses that haven't been covered under the recognition notice. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Claire. Amanda, I'll throw to you next. Do the recognition notices contain information about the applicant? i.e., will we know who has made the application for the recognition notice?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So when it comes to recognition notices, they incorporate product certificates. So that's obviously public information, and that's the information that we need to use to evaluate and publish. So we won't be publishing or requiring any sort of additional information around the supplier or manufacturer, just what is available on the product certificate. So as Claire mentioned, that's really a basis for starting evaluation, and that will be the information that would be providing on the recognition notice would essentially be the product certificate, perhaps any standards or specifications that are attached to that product, but that's it, essentially.
Thanks, Amanda. The initial consultation period for phase 1 seemed very short. So can you give us an idea of how long the consultation period would typically be? Obviously, this is for the public to have some say as whether the information in those notices is correct, valid, and should be accepted. So yeah, any expectations that you can set with people?
Yeah, that's another really good question. So, as Claire mentioned, because recognition notices are secondary legislation, every time we proposing to publish recognition notices, we need to publicly consult. Now, in terms of what we're required to do, we need to provide reasonable time for feedback. So, MB consultations tend to run anywhere sort of between 10 working days and sort of 2 to 3 weeks, depending, I guess, on the scope of the consultation. The first phase consultation for the first lot of Watermark products was very short, but what Standards Australia really came to the party and provided us with free read-only access of the standards we had cited in those recognition notices, which made that they gave us that very specific time frame to provide that free access. So we ran with it because it obviously makes it a lot easier for people to provide good feedback where they can actually read the standards that we're citing. So that was shorter. It's important to note that we're unlikely to get that free access to standards in future consultations. So future consultations will be longer. It means that anyone who wants to provide feedback, if they really want to get into the nitty gritty of any cited standards, they're going to have to go and access them themselves. I will note that as part of the phase 2 Watermark recognitions and the consultation, a lot of the Watermark products that we're looking at right now have been certified against Watermark technical specifications, which are, I guess, slightly more bespoke. So technical specifications are used by Watermark where there isn't a specific standard that covers that product. And all of those technical specifications are publicly accessible and available. So when we open the consultation, probably mid-November to December for that phase 2, you'll be able to look at most of those technical specifications and be able to provide feedback. But
Yep.
Just to reiterate, future consultations will be longer, and we always make sure we send out emails and have the information up on our Have You Say website at MB so people can provide feedback.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. Claire, back to you. Is there a cost to the application process?
So at this stage, it's kind of yet to be determined. The legislation's silent on the matter, so we don't have to charge a fee, but we also can charge a fee. So we're sort of at the minute we are developing phase 3, so that's sort of under consideration. The minister we know didn't have intent to for this process to cost too much to the sector. So we imagine that it would be a fairly nominal fee based on these evaluations. Yeah.
Okay. So just to be clear on that, what you're doing at the moment with the Watermark products, there's no fee there, but for individual applications as phase 3, there could be a cost involved.
Yeah, that's right. And that's because Watermark is a nominated scheme. So the government has nominated that scheme for that recognition, whereas where you have applicants, it's a different kind of process.
Okay, so moving on, in terms of the application process itself, how long do you expect that will take?
Again, phase 3 is currently under development, and we aim to have more information available to the sector later this year and early next year to give some real clarity around how long that application process will take, because we know from your feedback that you need that transparency and you need that certainty in terms of how long it'll take so you can plan what you need to. So we will endeavour to provide as much clarity and certainty as we can. And so just watch the space in the coming months.
Great. Thanks, Claire. Right. Another question here. Will a supplier be limited to how many products they can apply to the scheme?
I guess not technically, but of course, what we are looking to do is provide some framework around the types of products that we would like to see. There will be certain criteria that we'll be applying, obviously value to the New Zealand market, potentially after installation support or that kind of thing. So we haven't set any limits at the moment, but that is under consideration. So again, still under development. Watch the space, and we'll give you more information soon.
Okay. Amanda, I'm going to cut to you. Like you mentioned liability, will a BCA be liable at all if they're relying on a recognition notice?
Good question. So BCAs will have liability protection for anything done or not done, omitted in good faith regarding a recognition for an overseas certified product. This is the same liability setting as for a code mark certificate for them. So because they're required to accept a recognition notice as evidence of compliance with the building code, as Claire discussed earlier, they need to ensure that the recognition notice and the product certificate are valid and the product is being used as intended and according to any conditions or limitations specified on the recognition notice. So that's their responsibility. And then, yeah, they are protected for any good faith decisions based on that.
Okay, that covers the BCA. Amanda, I'll stick with you. What about MB? Are they liable for failure of a product that relied on a recognition notice?
So MB also has liability protection, but it's important to consider, I think, the circumstances of a hopefully, fingers crossed, no product failure, but the circumstances of a product failure. So as I mentioned, liability settings for overseas imported products remain the same as they are right now. Suppliers and importers need to ensure that the products they are supplying comply with the relevant provisions of the building code if installed in accordance with the technical data specifications, etc., prescribed by the manufacturer. So there isn't any changes to the liability settings. It's the same status quo as we have right now for any imported product.
Okay. Claire, a question. What about a product that is not part of hasn't been tested by a CAB? Sorry, it's not part of an overseas scheme, but it has been tested to an overseas standard.
Yeah, really good question. And this is something I think there's a little bit of confusion about. So this particular pathway looks at products that have been certified overseas. So they have been assessed and evaluated by a conformity assessment body through a scheme. That differs from a product that has been tested, and that might be kind of part of a scheme, but it doesn't necessarily have all the elements of a scheme that include that assurance that I mentioned in the slides previously around monitoring and evaluation and ongoing audits. So those are the types of things that we're looking for in a scheme. And if the product's just tested and has a test certificate, it probably wouldn't apply to this particular pathway. In saying that, if it is a test that is generally used overseas, you may look to have that standard that it's being tested to included within the building product specifications, which is the second pathway in these new legislative pathways.
Yeah. Right. Okay, thanks, Claire. I'm just going to stick with you. I think we've already covered this. Jeff says, is there a timetable for upcoming evaluations beyond the watermark stuff, i.e. for cladding and windows?
As I mentioned, still under development. We will come back to you with more detail about what our intent is for phase 3. We're very keen to give the sector a lot of transparency or certainty about what they can expect. So we'll provide you with that information in the coming months.
So I think just to be clear, we'll have an update in the new year around the details and timing, but that's applications are likely to start middle of 2026.
Yeah,
for reference. Great, thank you. Claire, I'm just going to stick with you as well. Note from Jason, what help, if any, will MB be doing to ensure that the product is certified for all required codes for New Zealand?
As I mentioned previously, the recognition notice will be dependent upon the certificate, the information that's available on the product certificate that's being evaluated. So it really depends on what information is there that we can actually validate. So unlike Codemark, which is required to have certification to all relevant building code clauses for the intended use of that product, MB may not be able to evaluate all of those things because the overseas jurisdiction or certification will be different to the requirements in the New Zealand Building Code. So there is a bit of a nuance there that you'll need to look out for and make some sort of judgment on whether or not that product certificate will be sufficient enough for the New Zealand context. Yeah, if you bring it to market.
Great, thanks, Claire. Amanda, message from Laurent. The watermark certificates are changing constantly. They're reissued every 5 years. So how long do you expect it will take for a new watermark certificate to be recognised in New Zealand?
Yeah, it's a good question. I thought I might just roll that up with a couple more. People have asked around validity of certificates and what if the building code, the New Zealand Building Code changes. So they're all really important questions. And something we didn't discuss during the presentation is that once we've issued recognition notices, the MB does have an ongoing monitoring scheme set up, which is part of the team that Claire is a member of. So because the secondary legislation, we need to monitor every recognition notice to make sure that all of those recognition notices do still, they're relevant, those product certificates are current, that there haven't been any changes that impact their suitability in New Zealand, that they still comply with those provisions of the building code. So that means MB has to do a lot of ongoing work once those recognition notices have been published. So we do need to go back and check on a pretty regular basis which product certificates have changed, which ones have expired, which certificates might be new in a scheme, like new watermark certificates that have now entered the scheme, and then we'd have to make that process of either amending existing recognition notices because there may be some product certificates that have been withdrawn or expired, so they need to be removed. Some product certificates may have changed, which means that we need to basically do a re-evaluation, look at the changes. Does that mean that there are different limitations or conditions or intended use of that product? That again means that recognition notice needs to be amended. And when new certificates enter a scheme, we then would have to put that through those products potentially through the evaluation process and issue new recognition notices for those. So there is a framework set up. So this is ongoing work. We're not just sort of publishing and then just leaving them to gather dust and ignoring them. So, and again, if any of our New Zealand Building Code changes, again, we would have to go back and reevaluate what recognitions we have published to see if there's any impact there. And I would say that we would look at that in the same way as that the Codemark scheme would have to do for any changes to our regulatory environment as well. So yeah, we're essentially would be working in a similar way to make sure that any recognised product is still fit for purpose and complies with the relevant provisions of the building code.
Cool. Okay. Thanks, Amanda. We've got another 6 or 7 minutes here, so we'll just rattle through these questions quickly. A note from Andrew: are there going to be any consultants that can help companies either prepare or can actually complete this process on behalf of a importer or supplier. Andrew, there's a number of organisations and consultants who currently do that for existing compliance pathways, so I'm sure they will extend their services to this in the future. It's a little early at this point, but certainly just and just keep in contact. I know a number of players who can assist you there. We've got a note from Anthony with regards to Windows. There's a bit of detail in this, but I suppose at the heart of this, Amanda and Claire, I think it's really around ensuring that the industry has some confidence that MB will have the technical ability to be able to apply the requirements for the overseas certification and how that applies here to New Zealand to ensure the equivalency is met and can be used as a compliance pathway alongside local certification. So really at the heart of this is the ability for MB to be able to look at the strong New Zealand context with these overseas products. So succinct answer on that, or is this an offline question? I'll throw to both of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think I can probably answer that and say that, as I mentioned, we've got technical experts that will be helping us with the evaluations of these certificates. We will be getting technical experts that are familiar with any of those standards that have been referenced as evidence of compliance, or any other, they'll have to get up to speed with potentially the jurisdiction of those code requirements that they might be evaluated against or say they comply with. So we'll be working really closely to make sure that we have the right technical expertise in place to be able to evaluate, and then obviously note any limitations or conditions within those recognition notices. Did you want to add anything, Amanda?
No, you covered it.
There was a note from John who talked about if a product has already been involved in CodeMark but has come out of a CodeMark scheme, in this case could be due to the maintenance cost. Is there a process to be able to consider that and transfer that into a recognition notice?
I mean, yes, potentially. I mean, the intent of this pathway was to remove barriers for products that had already gone through an overseas certification process, and not needing to necessarily have to go through a secondary New Zealand, i.e. CodeMark certification process or additional testing and appraisals to be accepted in New Zealand. So, I mean, in theory, if a product has a current overseas certification for that product, then potentially as part of phase 3, you could apply for recognition of that product. And we would, as Claire mentioned, we would look to evaluate that product based on this product certificate. It just depends if there's been any issues with the CodeMark scheme, because that would be something we would look at.
But it would need to be a live and valid certificate for us to be able to do that evaluation process. Yeah. So it'd have to be part of a scheme. Yeah.
Yep. And as we've mentioned too, I mean, the first part of the process is looking at the scheme itself. So it's not just about the product. We would have to, the first step would be looking at the scheme. And if the scheme, I guess, doesn't pass evaluation, we kind of can't then look at the product certificate. So you need to be, the product needs to be currently certified overseas, as Claire mentioned, but we then first look at the scheme, and then we would then look at the product. And I think another thing that we might not have mentioned is, as part of the development of an application process, we'll also need to look at exactly how we would prioritise certain types of products or schemes, or at least provide some detailed information sort of for potential applicants to understand what information they're going to need to provide us to make the application process smoother.
Great. Okay, just a couple of quick questions to go. Is MB in effect actually acting as a certifying body then?
This is a really tricky question. So no. So we're not evaluating the product itself. We're evaluating the evaluation of the product, if you like. So we're evaluating the certificate. We're assuming, or we are ensuring that the product has already gone through that certification process. It already is going through that robust assessment process to make sure that it's fit for purpose. What we're doing is essentially providing that translation from an overseas scheme or jurisdiction into the New Zealand context. So no, I would say.
Okay, cool. So a couple more here. Will there be requirements for revalidation / overseas testing using common New Zealand timber species?
We might have to take that question offline because it's very specific. So if it's all right, we will take that one offline and get someone who is familiar with that space to answer that.
Yeah. Hey, so it's a good point. There is a website. Sorry, there is an email address for particular questions around this. Claire, can you just remind us of that? Whoever this person is, it's anonymous, so I can't tell. But if they could actually email MB directly, we can get an answer to them. And that email address is Claire?
overseasproducts@mb.govt.nz.
Okay, overseas products, one word?
Yep.
MB. Okay. A couple of final questions. Is there written criteria on how the experts are selected? So just to be clear, these will be the people who will help with the technical evaluation of the applications.
Yeah, so there isn't, we are producing guidance that will be published hopefully near the end of this month or early November on what the evaluation process is and how we would potentially engage external technical experts. We obviously have some internal technical experts, but as Claire mentioned, it will depending on the scheme we'd be looking at and the jurisdiction on which that scheme is, like the building regulatory system that's there, and the building typologies we might be looking to evaluate. We'll be wanting to bring in people who are quite specialised. So for instance, for Watermark, we've brought in technical experts who are very familiar with the Watermark scheme itself, the Australian building regulatory system, and plumbing and drainage products in particular, so they can actually do that technical work, I guess, on a more independent basis than just MB doing it, to ensure that the products and the standards to which they've been certified to actually have that pathway of compliance with our building code. And so we'd be looking to keep doing that for different types of building typologies. Obviously, cladding's a lot different than windows, different than insulation, and it depends if a product has come from a Belgian certification scheme or a North American certification scheme, etc. Yep. So it's still, this phase 3 is still, I know we've mentioned it a million times, it's still under development. And I think we would be looking to provide some clear, transparent criteria for how we would be evaluating different overseas products, typologies and schemes. And we would look to provide more information on how we would be looking to bring in external expertise, so it's transparent. But can't give you a heck of a lot right now, but we will give you more information when we have it.
Great, thanks, Amanda. Hey, I'm conscious of time. I just want to reiterate, this session has been recorded and will be available on the MB website over the next week. You'll be made aware of that. So if you'd like to share this with any of your colleagues or team, you're more than welcome to do that. We do have a few more questions here, and so I'm loath to sort of hang up just yet. I think let's quickly fly through these. But for those of you that do need to go, thank you very much for your attendance. And just want to reiterate that we will be providing another update in December that'll be addressing phase 2, but also you could have some more information around the phase 3 criteria. Okay, so there was a question here around, is the intention for phase 2 to include all Watermark products or just more of them? Claire?
So the intention for phase 2 is to include the residual of the Watermark products that haven't been recognised in phase 1. The exception is that anything that has an expiry date prior to 2026, we have excluded mainly for monitoring purposes so that we're not doubling up or creating more work. But essentially, we're looking at all of the specifications for everything residual that we didn't include in phase one.
So Claire, that's going to go from 22 recognition notices covering 92,000 products. So what will give us an idea of what phase two would take that to?
So we have approximately, I think, 82 additional recognition notices, which will bring you up to, I think that the current ABCB or Australian Building Codes Board website says 260,000 products. It won't include all of those, but it would include a good proportion of them.
Okay. All right. So question here, how quickly is parliamentary approval expected for the recognition notice, considering the thousands of products already in overseas markets?
So as I mentioned, the recognition notices need to be tabled in Parliament, so that'll depend on how quickly we can evaluate those products and push them through that recognition process. So we'll be taking a pretty considered approach to the types of products that we'll be looking to recognize, also within our limits, obviously, of the technical expertise that we have available and that kind of thing. So we will provide you with more information about this process as we move forward. But we do also need to work somewhat within that parliamentary process, and we'll likely, well, they're not finalized, be doing it in phases. So you'll have an idea of when those recognitions will be made.
Yeah. Claire, another question here. The optics on this is that it's supporting overseas product, not locally made products. So just a key point, this requires on product that has overseas certification. It may well be manufactured in New Zealand, but if it has an overseas certificate, it would still be valid.
Yeah.
But anyway, so just at a high level, not good news for New Zealand manufacturers. There'll be further job losses and unfair, particularly for companies who have already invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in local compliance pathways. Claire, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, look, I think that although this has definitely been framed up as providing more competition to New Zealand, this pathway doesn't actually exclude New Zealand manufacturers from using this pathway. If the New Zealand manufacturer has looked to get overseas certification, I think it opens up their product more globally anyway for use, and then they can use that same certification to be recognized here in New Zealand without having to double up on getting a locally provided certification as well. So the idea is to try and streamline that process without impacting New Zealand manufacturers.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, Veron's got a question. What is the value addition to compliance of the product through this process, especially if the liability of the product continues to be with the supplier? Amanda?
Yeah, good question. So what this pathway is, it's an additional deemed to comply pathway. So we have a few at the moment. We've got deemed to comply through an acceptable solution or verification method, a code mark product certificate. So this is an addition. So what it means, the value add is that a BCA must accept your product if it's been recognised and it's used as intended with the scope of limitations, which is the same as a code mark product certificate. They have to accept it as compliant with the New Zealand Building Code. So if you, obviously we've looked at Waterbuck now, but if you, in phase 3, if we are looking at, some unfamiliar products that some BCAs might be a bit reluctant and they want to really dig into that and they want to ask a lot of questions and they're going to, they might be asking for a lot of evidence around how your product complies because it's unfamiliar, say a window cladding product, etc. If there is a recognition notice for that product, then they have to accept it as compliant with those building code clauses that have been specified. So that streamlines the consenting process for that product, and it should mean that there is savings in terms of the time that it takes to get your product through the consenting process. And obviously, if it's a deemed to comply pathway, that's a bit more attractive if it's in the shops. People are, architects and specifiers are going to want to specify products that aren't going to get held up in in the consenting process because of, questions and wanting, test results and further additional evidence for a BCA to make that good faith, satisfied and reasonable grounds decision on the compliance of that product. So that's the value there.
Yep, great. Hey, so final question here, and it's from Anthony. To clarify, in regards to liability, if the BCAs utilise a recognition notice from MB, but the product is used outside of the limitations, they will be liable for damages due to product failure. And so just to be clear, I think Anthony's talking about the BCA would be liable for damages due to product failure. Clear, Amanda, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can comment on that. So the BCA has to be, so the BCA is checking that the product is being used within the scope and limitations of that recognition, right? If it's being used outside of those limitations, then the BCA should really be pushing that back. So they're not indemnified if they're not following the process appropriately, essentially. Yeah.
Yep. Great.
But we would note that the same as any other product that has been, specified correctly and consented, if it's installed incorrectly and there is product failure because of that, then that would go to either the builder or the practitioner who's installed that incorrectly, as it would be now for anything else that's been consented.
Great. Hey, let's leave it there. Hey, thank you for everyone who's still there. Nancy, can you please just launch our final poll? For those of you who are remaining, just would enjoy just your feedback on a couple of things. So do we cover enough content? Do you feel comfortable with it? Would you consider using this as a pathway in the future? So if you could just spend 30 seconds as you exit, that would be appreciated. I want to say thanks to Claire and Amanda for your insights today, and look out for more information over the next few months in lead up to phase 2, going live in December, and then obviously more information around that phase 3 in the new year. Thanks so much for your participation, and we'll leave it there. Enjoy the rest of your day.